So, Berto, someone wrote in and wanted us to talk about women who perpetrate sexual violence on other women because she has, and I'll read her email in a second, but she wanted us to raise awareness of this issue that doesn't get talked about very much.
Wow.
Are you ready for this?
I don't know if I am, but I am interested.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor.
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I prepare French macaroons.
So, as a caveat to this, I just want to say that this episode is not about men's rights or about anti-feminism or anything like that. I could see how people might click on this and think like, oh, this is...
Oh, see, women do it too.
Yeah, right. I'm a staunch feminist. I'm not the sort of feminist that's being talked about on the internet, which is a straw woman, if you will. But I'm the kind of feminist who believes that everyone should be treated well and fairly and, so to speak, equally, men and women included. Also, we both recognize that research demonstrates that most perpetrators of sexual assault are men. In fact, in the United States, it's mostly white men. But many are women. And actually some research suggests that among sexual violence perpetrators, there might be many, many more women doing it than we typically understand, especially if we broaden the definition of sexual assault, because we tend to see sexual assault, especially in the past, as like the rape of a man on a woman and there's a penis going inside something. But we know now that you can be sexually assaulted without penetration, without a penis being involved at all. And it has more to do with the act of fear and the threat and coercion and this kind of thing.
I learned about these statistics when the Me Too movement started because... a man posted a Me Too, but like a story that they had gone through, and they got a lot of hate. Like, how dare you take that? And then I remember posting.
Hate from who?
From people saying that this isn't about men, it's about women. And I was trying to make the point that isn't it about sexual abuse of power and sexual abuse? And I looked up statistics because I was curious. I'm like, is this really just a female problem? And no, it's not. And in fact, like what you were saying, there's a chance that a lot of males underreport because it is taboo to say that you've been. I mean, I certainly can speak directly to how, for most of my life as a young person and then into my early 20s, I felt like it'd be ridiculous for me to call it that I had been sexually abused. That's
right, because you had a babysitter,
right,
who was a lot older than you, and she sexually assaulted you,
right,
and it wasn't like she held you down at knife point,
no,
but it was coercive and abusive because it was not age appropriate.
right,
And it wasn't, you weren't really given a choice, at least that was free,
Yeah.
You weren't, it wasn't like a willful thing in the beginning. And so, and of course in our society, if there was a male babysitter that had sex with how old are you?
I was 5.
Yeah, had a male babysitter had sex with a 5-year-old girl. Like oh, it's rape. That's terrible. But somehow when it's a girl babysitter, it's like, well,
Well, I used to tell it as like, oh, dude, like this happened to me,
Right.
And then it took a while and therapy and me acting out in horrible ways for me to realize, oh,
you were traumatized and had trauma reactions.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about female violence on men and males, but we're also going to be talking about in this episode about women violence on women. Right. And, the other part of this caveat, I just want to say, the fact that I have to say this preamble is evidence that our society is screwed up when it comes to sex in general, and particularly when it comes to female perpetrators of sexual violence. It's just really silly that it's evidence that we need an episode like this
Yeah.
because I need to have a preamble like this.
Yeah.
I need to have a preamble that says this isn't about men's rights,
Right.
And I'm a feminist, but I'm the good kind of feminist.
Yeah.
And also, I also need to, we also fully recognize the fact that men perpetrate these crimes, according to research, seemingly much more often than women do. It's like, why do we have to say that?
Right.
Okay. So patron Eve wrote in, and she said we could say her name because she wants to raise awareness about this.
Okay.
She says, it's a bit of a long one, but I think it's worth hearing her different nuances here. I was wondering if you could talk about woman-on-woman sexual assault and rape. A few months ago, I disclosed to my therapist that I'd been assaulted my freshman year by another girl in my dorm. She was one of the first people I had disclosed my queer identity to and was very supportive, which I now see as predatory and manipulative. When I disclosed this to my therapist, she immediately told me that what happened was sexual assault and rape, and that it explained a lot of my PTSD symptoms. Since then, we have started deconstructing the societal messages that I received that kept me from recognizing the assault for what it was. The main one being that women are not violent, especially not sexually violent. And so it could not have possibly been assault or rape. It's taken me 7 years of living with PTSD symptoms and lots of denial to get to a place where I could start dealing with what actually happened. I can only think that if there had been more education and awareness, I would have been able to recognize the assault for what it was and get help earlier. I didn't really know her that well at the time. We were mainly just acquaintances. She lived in my dorm and we had a few classes together. At one point, she asked me if I was gay, and I said yes. She was very supportive, offering to take me out to a few gay bars and introduce me to some of her queer-identified friends, since I was new to town and didn't know that many people. She identified as straight at the time and had a boyfriend. We were in a class together, and we had to watch a movie outside of class, so she invited another classmate and me to come over and watch the movie in her dorm room. When I arrived, she immediately locked the door and let me know that the other classmate who was supposed to be there wasn't feeling well and wasn't going to be there. I already felt uncomfortable because she immediately locked the door, but I dismissed it, thinking that maybe she just didn't want her other roommate coming in or something. So we started watching the movie. At some point, she pinned me down and began sexually assaulting me. I dissociated for most of it, so I don't remember many of the details. She had glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling, which I repeatedly counted in my head until it was over. As I got up to leave, she nonchalantly asked me if I wanted to meet up over the weekend to work on a project that was due for another class. I didn't know how to process what had just happened, so I said sure. My therapist has described this as crazy making, which really helped me understand how much of a mindfuck it was. I think her gaslighting behavior afterward was actually more difficult in some ways than the assault itself. I denied it for a really long time, saying that she didn't know what she was doing and that it was just a misunderstanding. It was only when my PTSD symptoms began to limit my functioning that I finally was able to process it. Anyway, I hope sharing my story helps someone. I certainly wish I had had that. Any reactions, Berto?
Yeah. So it shows how much bias I still hold in my head, where I hear that this person dissociated, and I think, well, really? Like, because and I'm saying that this is wrong, but like in my head, I was thinking, come on, you remember what happened. And it's like, well,
you can remember being dissociative. Dissociation means you go to a place in your brain that's sort of detached from your body.
Yeah, and I have done that, but I am clearly not empathetic enough about it.
And you can remember, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what are you saying? I don't know what you're saying.
So I'm sort of I'm sort of like guilting myself a bit, because as you were reading that part, I thought to myself, like, I was skeptical
Of what?
of her narrative in that point of the story, that she had dissociated and doesn't remember a lot of the details. And the reason, again, I'm not saying this is right. I'm saying that because in my head, I remember my details. So I'm like, why wouldn't someone else remember their details? But that's clearly not.
So you're just skeptical of the dissociation. You're not skeptical of.
I'm not actually skeptical. I'm saying what was running through my head.
You
as
have a
we were
knee-jerk
reading.
reaction.
My knee-jerk reaction.
A
was
cultural
to be
knee-jerk reaction.
Yes, yeah. And I actually, because in general, I tend to remember things unless I was too drunk or something. So I tend to think, well, no, I remember things. But so that was one knee-jerk reaction. The other one was how immediately aggressive to lock the door. And then I look back at me when I was in high school. I think I've told this story where I was parked with my girlfriend and I moved the lever that lowers the seat back. And so it lowered suddenly.
Her seat.
And she sort of laughed, and I was like, oh, that's kind of a neat maneuver. I heard later from a friend that she had talked to that she got super freaked out in that moment. Now, keep in mind, she had many stories/experiences of people being sexually aggressive with her and potentially, I don't know what was real or not, but potentially raping her or something. So it might have been PTSD. But in either case, that action that I took that I was like, what? I'm just lowering your seat. She was highly distressed by, and I didn't know it.
Well, was that the first time you'd made out with her?
No, but it was
early on.
It was early on in the relationship,
right?
For sure. Yeah, and so what I'm saying is that even though when you read the thing about she locked the door immediately, I'm like, whoa, that's creepy. Then at the same time, I'm thinking, is this college? Is she just unaware of what that could be?
Well, okay, so yeah, and I'm glad you're pointing out some of these things. So for people who have been assaulted in this way, because you haven't been assaulted in this way,
not in this way. No.
You were coerced as a extremely innocent, unknowing 5-year-old into doing completely unage appropriate
actions that I didn't even really understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas this is an adult woman,
right,
who was going through something, and for people who have been through similar experiences like this, they will instantly know the details. They feel, because Eve isn't giving us any details.
Right. There's
one sentence that she describes. She just says, at some point she pinned me down and began assaulting me. So from that, you're like, pinned you down, if you can't relate, you'll just be like, well,
that could mean so many things.
What do you mean? Like she got on top of you? Because that's what people do when they make out. People get on top of people. You mean pinned down? And assaulting? What do you mean assaulting? Like she made out with you? Like what's going on? And so, and particularly for people who culturally believe that assaults have to involve some sort of penetration, they're like, well, how can a woman penetrate? Which of course they can, but anyway. But for people who have been through this, and for me, who has heard so many stories, I know she was assaulted because she's saying a few things. One is that that she was pinned down and she used the word assault, and then she dissociated. So what I'm reading between the lines, which I'm positive were present, was a message of danger that the perpetrator gave, probably on purpose, or at least was implying danger because she wanted something. And in the same way that any rape, we can all imagine a male doing it, right? But females are just as capable of the exact same mental process and motivation as a male rapist can be, exact same. And so there's that. The other thing is that she wouldn't be talking about it. Most people don't talk about sexual assaults anyway.
Right.
So the fact that she's even labeling it as an assault, it's very, very likely there are a lot of details here that she's not talking about. Maybe because of PTSD, she doesn't want to go into the details. I don't know, but you don't dissociate when you only dissociate when there's a message of danger.
Yeah.
And also the other key factor here is she talks about how she just stared at the ceiling and waited for it to get over. If you're having sex with someone and they're just staring at the ceiling waiting for it to be over. Like, okay, when you're in a movie theater and you don't like the movie,
right,
and you just sort of stare at the ceiling because you don't like the movie, then that's one thing. But there's no feedback loop because it's a unfeeling movie screen that doesn't have empathy. When you're having sex between two people, there are so many messages of consent and enjoyment or lack of that are undeniable. And if you've never assaulted someone or you've never been assaulted, then my guess is that every single sexual encounter you've had has been, for the most part, consensual to both people. And when someone is not consenting and someone's not into it, then it's very clear to the other person. And so I'm assuming that that's the state that was happening, and the perpetrator, this woman perpetrator, did it anyway, you know? And then afterwards, never at any, because this is the first time they've been together, you know? And she has a boyfriend. So it's just like, boom, you know? And that's another tactic that rapists will do, is sudden aggression, because they've learned over time that if they build up to it, the person will they'll get away. Right. So you have to like suddenly, boom, make it happen. And you act like nothing happened afterwards. You're like, oh, okay, well, Weinstein would do that all the time. Right. No, okay. See you at the office.
We'll talk about the movie.
Yeah. And it's a tactic that people use because they know they've done something wrong and they don't want to get in trouble. And there's two witnesses in this room. And so if I gaslight the other witness, then I get away with it, you know? And so anyway, so for people who have been assaulted, they hear that story. They're like, ooh, I know the details that are in there. It's sort of like, talking about a horrific car accident or something, or let me say a bike accident,
right?
Or a near bike accident. Let me just say that, there was this one time I was biking around Green Lake and I was in the bike lane. There's a bike lane that goes around Green Lake. The bike lane on the street. Do you know the bike? There's the regular path. Then there's a street and there's a bike lane. I'm in the bike lane. It's my lane. Cars can't come in the bike lane.
Right.
Well, I was going in the bike lane and there was a car, cars kind of zooming by. And then this car wanted to go around another car because it was turning left. And so it just jammed into the bike lane without looking or anything, and went around the car. And in that minute, I didn't get hit, but I nearly got hit. And I saw my life pass before me, because I was like, if I was half a second, into the future, I would be dead or break my neck or something. And I didn't wear a helmet back then. And
my God, that's so scary.
I was like, oh my God. Okay. So to people who have been through experiences like that, they know exactly what I'm talking about.
Right.
They've had those experiences. They'll feel it in their bones. For people who don't, and especially people who hate bicyclists, they'll be like, well, fuck you for being on the road or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, my point is that when I read this story, I read between the lines that there was coercion. Right. There was a lack of responsiveness from the perpetrator about her discomfort. There was total lack of regard for the victim regarding whether or not she cared. I mean, the perpetrator might have even wanted the victim to not want, because there are people who get off from doing things to people who don't want it to happen to them. And women are just as capable of that disorder as men are.
Now, I do wonder one thing. So because of, very likely because of my trauma, as you know, when I was younger, I did cross boundaries in a few occasions where I was in a social situation and I inappropriately touched a woman, thinking in my head it was totally appropriate, and I'm sure she was enjoying it. And later to find out that it was not appropriate and she definitely didn't enjoy it. And, and I was like, what? And it wasn't until I went through therapy and I realized that I was traumatized, all these things, that I'm like, oh, geez, I was just acting out, me being the abuser, and blah 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 blah. So I do wonder. But I'm sure there are different kinds of abusers, different kind of amounts of awareness, all the way to a psychopath that's like planning all these little things and everything. But I do wonder, at what level someone is just acting out their own, what you were calling dissociation of their own. Like it could be that she was abused too, and I'm not excusing her behavior, of course. I'm just saying that it's like, it's interesting because she might have been like, "Oh, I like this girl, so okay,
right.
I'm just gonna," and I can relate what I can relate the most to is when I used to go on shopping sprees, where I would absolutely dissociate. Clothing, You're
using dissociation maybe a little liberally, but
it could be, yeah, but
yeah.
Or let me not use the word. Let me say, I would be in this situation where there was this part of my mind that would say like, wait, why are you walking into the store right now? No, you should. And then a different part would take over, and I would go into an unstoppable path, and it felt like that's what I have to do. And only much later would I look back and be like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Right. So it's possible that the patron Eve's perpetrator was like you in that she had been abused, and in the moment, so in those moments, if I were just to stop time when you were doing those things to those women and harming them, and I stopped you and I said, okay, so I'm fairly sure what you're doing right now is non-consensual and scary to this other person. Would you say, what? Like, would you be completely unaware, or would you be like, yeah, I was sort of like in denial of that fact, but now that you pointed out, maybe that's true. I don't know. What would you say?
I honestly don't remember, because I used to definitely confuse partying, being at parties and partying and being drunk with, I don't know, we're just touching, like people touch each other. Like,
so
whatever.
were you confused or in denial, I guess is the question. Because you were late, because you were modeled a psychopathic version of sexuality as a child that you followed in that footsteps. So it's possible you were confused, but it's also possible you were in denial.
Well, I will say this. I don't think I would have ever done any of those sober.
Okay.
So I don't know if that, I feel like that makes it so that because if I had been sober, I would have been aware of the inappropriateness of the context of everything. But because I wasn't, in my mind, I was like, not even thinking that way. It's just like, well, I don't know, we're at a party. This is what's happening. This is what we do.
So the next day you would sober up, and if someone...
No. It took a long time. Like, I didn't think I had done anything wrong for years.
Okay. So it sounds more like confused.
Yeah, I guess so.
And possibly in denial, but
because in one of these cases, my friend...
in denial, you don't know you're in denial.
Right. In one of these cases, my friend, like it directly affected a friendship with someone because it was like his girlfriend. And in my mind, I was sorry about like that aspect. Like, oh, you're right. That's terrible. But in my mind, I had done nothing wrong beyond that until way later when I was like, oh man, I was so horrible, you know? And I got lucky in a sense that I never transgressed beyond, you know, I never actually like, it never progressed beyond that because I do think that if left unchecked, I could have become like a really bad individual.
Yeah. Yeah, this is interesting. I didn't know we were going to go to this place, given that I suspected we talked about your victim status, but not your perpetrator status. So one sort of last question about this is, so in those moments, did you willingly do something that was harmful to other people, or were you completely convinced that it was above board, or were you just in general a little unempathetic towards other human beings?
I don't think it was I didn't think it was a lack of empathy. Because what would go through my mind was like, ooh, I think we're having a moment here. And then without words, what a moment translates to, so I'm adding words that didn't really exist. What a moment translates to is I should probably grab this person's crotch.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Right.
And like, of course, analyzing it much later and in therapy, I was like, oh yeah, because like that was the model. I'm like, hey, little kid, come here, do this to me. And it was like such a mechanical, like, so in my mind, there wasn't any like natural progression. And again, it was always, alcohol was involved on both sides.
So
people were drunk. We were at a social event.
Sure. So sober the next day before you were enlightened, if I would have said, so tell me what happened last night. And you're like, okay, well, so I was with this girl and like, I felt some chemistry. We were having some back and forth. And then I just went for it. I just grabbed her in the pussy. Yeah. Right.
And they just let you do it when you're famous.
Right. But no, that's what you say. So I just grabbed her and then she laughed and I don't know, things got a little weird after that. And I sort of lost track of her and I don't know, maybe I'll try to get her phone number the next time I see her or something. And then I'm like, so what? Like, before you even kissed her, before you even like went to, I don't know, on a date or something, you just like right there, like in the middle of the public situation, you just like grabbed her. Like, is that what you did? You're like, oh yeah, well, Kirk, you weren't there.
Yeah, no, I would have been like, well, yeah, I mean, doesn't everyone, like, it's happened to me, like, definitely a thing you do.
Yeah, we were playing around.
We're just playing around. We're just flirting.
She was into it. She liked it.
Yeah.
And if I said, do you have any direct evidence that she liked that interaction, you know?
Right.
Other than her potentially an awkward reaction to
Which,
that.
by the way, I would not have said that there was an awkward reaction.
Yeah.
I would have said, like, what awkward? I mean, it was quick and brief, and we didn't do anything else.
So one last sort of bit here. What if I would have said, Humberto, there's a possibility that she felt sexually assaulted in that moment. I, of course, have no idea. Maybe she fully enjoyed it and wanted more, and she's upset that you didn't take it further. But given your description, based on my experience, there's a possibility that she is at home right now feeling as though she was essentially raped by you last night. What would you have said to that?
Well, in fact, what happened to me, which is that my friend confronted me. I don't know if it was the very next day, but he definitely confronted me and said, like, this person was very affected by that. And I was confused. I was like, and like I said, I mostly felt bad because it was his girlfriend. So I was like, that was what I felt bad about.
Not because she...
I that part, I was like, what do you mean? Like, there wasn't like, it's not like, why does she feel bad? And it's actually, I'm probably adding even things that weren't even there, because honestly in my head, what probably was the thing is, well, okay, so she feels bad because she's his girlfriend and we probably shouldn't have done that. Okay. And I feel bad because it is. And I was a dick and I was drunk. I shouldn't have done that. And that was the extent of it.
But you didn't think I assaulted.
No, that was not in my vocabulary, mentally or otherwise, at all.
Even though you had been assaulted.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
So I didn't know the triggers. I didn't know my actions that I would take that were in that direction. Like it just not, I was completely unaware of that connection.
That's interesting. Well,
but then I became painfully aware.
Yeah.
When I started going through it in therapy and when I started realizing, all the other things that were self-abuse, like, things that I did, like at a strip club, for example, that were pretty unhealthy and like, but it was me acting out things that I didn't realize I was acting out and all these things. So it took a long time and a lot of process for me to realize. And then I years later apologized to my friend. I was no longer in contact with the person, unfortunately, but I apologized to my friend in a different way because,
Yeah. That. Well, I commend you for your path and it makes sense. And the unfortunate aspect of this is that you were abused when you were 5, obviously. And then that led to behaviors and suffering for you mainly, and others around you
Yeah.
as a result of that. And you became enlightened, and that is good. And it gives some insight into how these kinds of cycles perpetuate, like how many people don't become enlightened,
Right.
and just continue to act out or it gets worse,
Yeah.
Because that's the other thing is, and if you alluded to this, I don't know if you were talking about this specifically, but say you didn't become enlightened or didn't have ways of getting your sexual needs met or lived in a more misogynistic group of people or something, and you increased those behaviors, escalated them, and then now you associate getting boners with things in that direction,
Right.
and then it escalates to kind of a fetish of like, I wonder if I can corner a girl and grab her,
Right.
or I can, force the girl into the bathroom stall and like make something happen, and meanwhile in your head, it's just like, well, she wouldn't have done it if she didn't like it,
Right. Totally. And by the way, one weird thing, and I used to think this was kind of common, but I'm thinking it can't be common based on the trends, and you'll see what I mean. I never got excited personally, like, just explicitly. I never got an erection or even the beginnings of an erection from that kind of activity or when I was at a strip club. And I always thought, well, when I started analyzing where all this came from and stuff, I thought, oh, well, yeah, because I was so little when this happened to me and I wouldn't get an erection back then. So, but I don't know that that's entirely true. But for whatever reason, it was never about my satisfaction. So like you would think like, oh, I must have gotten really excited, but it wasn't. It was always like a zombie acting out a script or something like that, right? And alcohol was absolutely always involved. In other words, like I said, never would I have done that sober.
Yeah, and I'm glad you bring this up because I often have this point of view, and I think you're really, I hope to people who listen to this podcast, making a good case for it because people like you and respect you and think that you're a good person. And you weren't like a terribly different person before. You were less mature and weren't recovered.
Right. So
there's that. But, from what I gather, you were a nice person. What year? Do you want to tell me what year?
Yeah. This would have been...
I mean, the year of enlightenment.
The year of enlightenment.
Was it before I met you?
Yeah. Well, my path started before I met you. I started because my first big situation was that panic attack, and that was like in 2003 or something.
Is that after The Sopranos came out?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah. And then but I actually didn't know that that's what it was, even though I had watched The Sopranos. But I started going to therapy and stuff, but I still, like, as you know, it wasn't like, okay, and then I was fine.
Yeah, I mean...
It took me like a decade.
Yeah, I mean, by the time I met you, apparently, according to what you're saying, you were better, but you definitely weren't at the end of the road there. Because I saw you do
and
stuff.
that's 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it had already been like at least 4, maybe even 5 years of starting to reimagine everything.
Yeah. And so the thesis that I often have around human beings is that a lot of bad things happen as the result of understandable beginnings.
Yeah.
And we often paint perpetrators in these, extremely nefarious, premeditated, knowing lights.
Right.
And certainly that can be the case. And maybe Eve's perpetrator fully knew what she was doing, completely understood. I'm going to invite, it's not unheard of. I'm going to invite this woman over to my place. I know I'm not going to invite that other person. I'm going to lock the door because I don't want anyone interrupting me and I don't know, maybe it wasn't even maybe it was a lock that Eve couldn't even access. I don't know. I'm going to, I know I've done this before. I know if I pin her down, she won't, I can rape her, there are men and women who do that completely knowingly. And there are people who perpetrate all sorts of horribleness in the denial state or confused state that you're talking about, which I believe. And for example, when someone with borderline is emotionally abusive or physically abusive with their spouse, or someone with narcissistic personality, they're terrified. And so take someone with borderline. Your wife is borderline. You come home from work 3 hours late, and you have alcohol in your breath, and your wife has been sitting at home wondering where you've been this whole time. And because of her trauma regarding abandonment, which was a very real thing to her growing up, she is extremely scared and hurt by what to you seems like a normal variation in your coming home behaviors. But to her, for 3 hours, she's been utterly terrified, dysregulated, maybe even cutting to cope. And you come home and you're just like, huh? Well, what? And that really hurts her, because it seems like you don't even really care, because she interprets it as you not caring about her feelings. And then she proceeds to get very angry at you, and maybe you start defending yourself, and maybe she punches you in the face.
Right.
Or she throws your stuff out into the street or something. Right. If you stop her in that moment and say, wait a second, your husband just had a couple of drinks with his friends after work, and he came home 3 hours later than you thought he would. Do you think it's okay to punch him in the face?
Right.
She would say, yes. You don't understand what he did to me. So that it's not a premeditated, like, ha ha ha, I'm going to control my husband, when he gets home.
So I can punch him in the face. Yeah.
Because I love to punch husbands in the face. And the same goes for men who perpetrate intimate partner violence. It's the same scenario. The wife, says something disparaging about him while they're at a dinner party, and he is so traumatized by looking bad when he grew up, because what looking bad was equated with was essentially like not getting any love or attention, maybe literally becoming an orphan because your parents used so much drugs, and you as a kid interpreted it as you not being good enough. So you spent your whole life trying to be perfect and good, and there you're at a dinner party, and your wife is talking a little bit of shade about you to your friends, and it deeply traumatizes you, and you have a deep traumatic reaction and terror of worry of loss that is very relevant to you. And then you go home, and because you're so terrified of these feelings, you don't know how to process them. You're not enlightened the way Berto you have. And so you say, okay, how do I stop this feeling? Well, I'm going to make sure this never fucking happens again. And I'm going to beat the shit out of her. Right. And I'm going to tell her, you do this again, this is what's going to happen.
Right. Okay. Just because I love you. Right.
Yeah. Well, and so you stop that person in the middle of that act, and you say, like, so are you doing this because you're evil? They'll be like, no, you don't understand.
I love this woman, but it's blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. You don't understand what she did to me.
Right. Right.
She said da, 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 da.
Right.
I've heard these statements from people.
Because this is an important distinction, is that, for example, and I am 100% sure about this. If there had ever been a situation where I was doing something and the person's like, let's say I was trying to kiss or even dance with someone, actually, even hold their hand or even talk to them, because this has happened. Like, if they said no, like, I always instantly stop and back off, right? And so in my mind, I think what happened is I thought that that's the only, not the only, but like, for someone, for there to be like a negative sign that you should progress, it's got to be like, someone said no, or someone pulled away or something.
Yeah.
And I just wasn't aware that there are boundaries that you don't cross.
Well, no, I disagree, because the vast majority of men do not suffer from the behaviors that you exhibited, and they have the exact same misconception.
I see.
The difference is you were not picking up on or regarding of other people's subtle messages of them not wanting you to do X, Y, or Z because of what you went through. You weren't actively disregarding it, but you were either subconsciously or were never taught the beginnings of developing that radar. Because most people know instinctually not to grab someone in the crotch in that situation, and yet they have the same notion of like, well, as long as she doesn't say no, then we're in the clear, right? Like a lot of men, especially back then, had that notion.
But there's a little more subtlety to it in the sense that, like I would hear stories from my friends starting in junior high and high school about like any number of encounters like that then progressed even further, or reverse encounter where, and
I suspect, and maybe I'm wrong, that those encounters, the way the subtleties played out, neither one of the people involved felt assaulted.
Right. No, I'm sure. Well, I don't know if I'm sure, but at least some of them probably not. Right. But I certainly, this is to your point, I certainly didn't know that there would be subtlety. I guess that's the point.
Right. And for the vast majority of people, they, through the regular upbringing around this sort of thing, or I don't know what percentage, a high percentage of people, they, through learning and experimenting, they figure out how to gauge consent without having to verbally say it, Yeah,
like as an example, the first time this ever happened, I was actually 6 or 7, and this little girl got in our car who was the daughter of a family friend, and she was my age. Actually, she was a year older than me. And she sat next to me, and I thought she was very cute, and we had just met, or we had met that day. It was like the first day we met or whatever.
You thought she was cute in the way a 7-year-old thinks someone's
she's
cute.
Pretty or whatever, right? And
you didn't want to have sex with her or kiss her or anything.
No, but what I did do and wanted to do was I put my hand down the back of her pants.
Right.
Who does that? Which 7-year-old does that?
Right.
And she was so confused. She looked at me like, what are you doing?
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Right.
So in my head, I like this girl, so obviously I'm just going to put my hand down her pants.
Because that was what was modeled to you, very, very explicitly.
And so what was happening in those moments later on, and by the way, this never happened again for years, like till I was in my 20s. Like it never happened in high school.
Interesting.
It never happened till I was in my 20s.
More drinking?
Yes, it's gotta be. Because in the moment, it wasn't like I was thinking, oh, I think I'm going to skip kissing and hugging and I'm just going to go for it. No, it wasn't even like that. There was no conversation or thought process. It was like, we're flirting. It's clear there's something going on. I'm just going to, it's not even, I'm just going to.
Yeah.
Hand just goes there.
Yeah. One narrative you could say based on your description is that an old tape that had yet to be erased had free reign of your will because your superego was too drunk to exert any notion of civility, shall we say. I realize that this episode is supposed to be about women violence against women.
But I am narcissistic.
Well, I think it's extremely interesting because we've never gone into depth on this before.
Right.
And I think you're very brave and, empathetic really to lay yourself on the line here with this as a perpetrator, and to get into that person, to get into the mind of a perpetrator, I think is relevant to the conversation, men and women. Having said all that, I just want to say to Patron Eve that this doesn't diminish, just because we're intimating that there might be a quote unquote justifiable reason or reasons for perpetration. This doesn't diminish your terror and PTSD and horribleness. Right. It also doesn't mean that the perpetrator had the sort of confusion that Berto was talking about. She, like I said, could have been totally knowing what she was doing. And based on the way that she reacted, and it sounds like they were sober, it sounds more like she was the sort of perpetrator who knew what she was doing.
Could be.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you have too. Like, I listen to a lot of video interviews with psychopaths, famous, and I find that I can't relate. I find, like, I hear their descriptions of everything, and I'm like, wow, they are so aware of everything that's happening, and they're so specifically conscious about the decisions they're making.
Yeah,
about most of it, anyways.
Well, like Ted Bundy, for example, he at a certain point was like, okay, this is how you manipulate the girl,
right?
This is how you get her in your car, and this is how you make sure that you kill her so you can have sex with a dead body.
Right.
Like it was all, and here's what I'm going to do, and I've done it before, and
I need to have these things in my trunk, and it's
it's not a confusion.
No, it's a level of it's almost like it's like so much introspection and self-understanding, but with zero empathy.
Right, zero empathy.
Yeah,
and again, in line with what this whole purpose of this talk is that because our society is so phobic around acknowledging that women can do these things too,
right,
and or match that up with much fewer females who actually do it, we can't point to a famous female perpetrator of this, and it's hard to imagine, but totally possible and has happened many, many times. Right. There have been and are currently right now women perpetrators, either of the confused kind, the denial kind, or the completely psychopathic knowing kind, doing all the sexual assaults you can imagine under the sun for all the reasons under the sun, whether it's sexual satisfaction, power, sadism, acting out their own sexual abuse. That women do all the same things that men do. So I have a lot of notes here, but I want to take a break, and when we get back, let's continue with that, Berto. What do you say?
Yep.
All right, we're back from the break. So whenever I hear lectures about perpetrators of sexual violence or physical violence in intimate relationships, 9 times out of 10, the lecturer will identify the perpetrator as male and the victim as female. Even when they're just talking about it in general, like
he will blah and she will blah.
Right. Like, and sometimes they even acknowledge, they'll say like, I'm just going to refer to the perpetrator as male and the victim as female because that's usually the situation.
Right.
Okay. So when men abuse women, when he is doing this to her, like so back in the day, so I've been in the field of psychology for 25 years now, and I've been hearing lectures every now and then along these lines. And I have to say it's been getting better lately with the gender identification, but it's still happening. And for many years, I used to just go along with it because I was like, I had taken the red pill or the blue pill. What, red pill? I don't know. And had also, it's almost always a dude, so we should just refer to it as a man.
Right.
And also, it feels funny to say when a person rapes another person, because isn't it usually a man on a woman?
Right.
You know what I mean? It just feels like, it's like, well, why would you refer to, it's like when a person has a penis, like usually it's a man.
Right.
So just say man,
Well, and I got to say, for the longest time, even not so long ago, 5 years ago, I don't know. I really still had the notion that like, I mean, women can't really rape men, you know, like I was thinking of all the teachers, you know, the teachers that come out like, oh, this teacher.
Mary Kay Letourneau.
Yeah. And all of them. I really did have this perspective of like, well, but that's a teenage boy. I remember being a teenage boy, and that would have been fine with me.
Right.
Even after I had processed my own abuse and all that stuff, I remember still feeling that way for a while.
Yeah. So let me get to the heart of that. You do not need a penis to terrorize somebody.
Right.
You do not need a penis to make someone feel like they are going to be harmed if you don't do what they tell you to do.
Right.
You don't need a penis to threaten somebody. You don't need a penis to punch somebody. You don't need a penis to have a gun.
Right.
You don't need a, you know, like, penises don't, preclude all of these things. Like
right.
the 99.9% of the behaviors that one can do to coerce and threaten and terrify and imply danger is completely separate from a penis. A woman, in some ways, can get away with it more easily because she might know that you aren't going to do anything because society won't hear you. Particularly if it's woman on woman, which I'll get into in a second. But that's the main point, is terror knows no bounds. Threat knows no bounds. And the vast majority of sexual assaults, or many, I can't remember this percentage, but a lot of sexual assaults occur as what they call date raping, which you could say this, Eve, that's what she's talking about. It wasn't a date, but it's not abducting someone and pulling them into a bush and assaulting them. It's people who know each other. And so, which is the vast majority of assaults that happen that way. It's an implication of danger. It's a, oh my God, I'm being held down right now.
Right.
I'm visibly upset, and they're continuing. Mm-hmm. This person isn't even stopping to see if I'm okay. They haven't even kissed me yet, and they're already going down to that place. Like, this person isn't normal.
Right.
What else are they fucking capable of? Right. If this person is capable of this crazy shit, what else are they capable of? I don't know. Do they have a gun? Do they have a knife?
Right.
If I fight back and I get away, will they talk shit about me and then I have to deal with some kind of thing there? Will they stalk me? Maybe I should just let it happen and then I can, please them and I can get out of this situation.
And a lot of, you're narrating it, but in the reality of a lot of these situations, all of these thoughts cross immediately, simultaneously, and none of them, and all of them.
Right.
And so it's the paralysis can be an easy reaction.
Right.
It's like,
right. Yeah. And if you've ever been through it, which I have, it is, and you're out there and you're listening to this and you've been through stuff like that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Like, there are obvious times when people feel threatened, like someone pulls a gun to your head. But there are all these other times where equally as danger inducing is the implication of what someone else is capable of.
Yeah.
And if you've been through that, then you know how that feels. If you haven't, it might be hard to empathize. But I'm here to tell you, I am a 6'1", capable, of average ability to fight back.
Right.
And I have been terrified by people smaller than me who, if push came to shove, I guess I could have taken them.
Yeah.
But because they implied to me that they were capable of doing things that were off the charts, they had demonstrated that to me. I was so scared that they were going to do something else.
Right.
Even though they hadn't directly threatened those things. But they were so prone to anger and so prone to impulsive acts, and they had sort of purposely shown me that through their emotionality, or had emotionally sort of reacted to things. I was terrified of them. People with personality disorders are like that with me. It's just like, you just don't know what they're capable of,
Right.
you know? Anyway, so I would hear these lectures and people would say things, you know, when he does this to her. And at first I just sort of went along with it because I thought, well, yeah, that's probably right. Then over time I started thinking, like, as I became more woke and more understanding, I was like, well, wait, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Like, that doesn't seem right. But I didn't have any power, you know, so I had to just sit through these lectures, which I just want to tell you, mostly women. In fact, at times I'd be the only man in the room.
Right.
And so I'm like, yeah, I'm going to be that guy.
No, you're not.
Yeah. He's going to stand up and say, hey, wait a second here.
Yeah.
Like, it's not my lecture,
Right.
da, da, da. So now, what do you know why they justify saying that? I basically have already said it.
Yeah, I mean, you said the usual thing, and what would come to mind is that it's most often statistically, you know, the data we have seems to be more males doing aggression to females.
Right. So,
oh, and by the way, one of the things that I found out is even if we kept it to just males, there is an unbelievable amount of male to male bullying and aggression that happens, I mean, abuse that happens, and especially in prison populations.
Right.
And that's often not only underreported, but people don't care about it.
right.
Yeah.
The hierarchy that I think is, one, no one reports, very few people report assaults anyway.
Yeah.
You know, to be a victim of a sexual assault is because our society is so backward. There's so many incentives to not report that. So there's an incredible stigma around if you're a female having been assaulted by a male. So it's not like those people are like totally unstigmatized. They're absolutely stigmatized. Even more stigmatized is when a male assaults another female or assaults a male.
Right.
Assaults another male. So those get reported even less because of the way our society is. Down from there, even more stigmatized is when a woman assaults a man.
Right.
Because then you're like, well, wait a second. Like, you know, so the first one is like, well, men can't be assaulted because they like sex.
Yeah.
So even gay men can't be assaulted, right? And even if you're not gay, well, you must have been asking for, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah.
The next level is, well, women certainly can't perpetrate those kinds of things.
Right.
And certainly can't on a man.
Right.
That's ridiculous. How do you assault a man? He needs to get a boner.
Yeah.
You know, if he has a boner, he wants it. Da, da, da. And then even more stigmatized is woman on woman, because one, women can't assault, and two, how does a woman assault a woman? Right. You know, it's like, and aren't they just friends at that point, rolling around together? Yeah. Like women are soft, you know, like you can't, you know, and so.
Oh, and by the way, another little detail here is that, you know, like in the stories again about the teachers and the kids, there's also a misconception, which I absolutely held, which is that it is possible that the victim thought they enjoyed it. They might have physically had pleasure from it and whatever.
Totally.
And it doesn't mean that they weren't abused and traumatized.
Right. You, for example, if we go back in time and ask 5-year-old Berto how you felt about those encounters with your babysitter, what would you have said?
Well, I know literally what I said, because when I talked with my friend who was my same age, who was also being abused by the same babysitter, we would talk about it sort of bragging to each other. And I think there was a little competitiveness of which one did she like better and stuff like that. And so in our little 5-year-old, I think about like a 5-year-old, like how crazy that mental model must have. And I'm sitting there talking with another little 5-year-old, and we're comparing stories. And did she do this? Yeah. And we're like, keep in mind, not only incapable of having an erection, let alone, like, I don't remember thinking of my penis in any way related to any of this. And then it's like, we're having these conversations. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. So,
And so a ridiculous person could have said, "Oh, well, then you enjoyed it. Never mind."
Right. Or at least you didn't dislike it.
Yeah.
Right. The other thing is that when you are in a situation where you are terrified and you know that one of the ways out of this is to please the other person, and you know that you can please the other person by quote unquote enjoying it, then you can compartmentalize that and say, okay, I'm going to turn on this system in my brain. I mean, I suppose everyone can kind of relate to this on some level, even if you haven't been in that situation.
Right.
In that, if you're old enough anyway, you've had sex when you didn't really want to have sex.
Sure.
Like it sucks, but there are times when, at the very least, you're not in the mood, or you might even be really, really not in the mood.
Yeah.
You're really tired, or you just
go through the motions.
Yeah, you just go through the motions.
Yeah.
And from and seemingly, according to blood flow, that you were into it, you know, but you weren't at the same time. So that's not sexual assault, but to demonstrate it's sort of analogous, Anyway.
Well, so actually, when I was in high school, there was a girl that really, really liked me, and I really liked her as a friend. But, I was a teenager, so I was sort of curious a little bit, but mostly I didn't try to pursue it, but I knew she really liked me. One time there was a party at a friend's house, and I took a shower, and I remember she was trying to look into the shower from outside or something. And afterwards, she basically wanted to give me oral sex, and I went along with it, but I didn't really want to and didn't enjoy it. I definitely did not climax. I did get an erection, and the whole time I was like, this doesn't feel good. What am I supposed to do? And then she finally just got tired. She's like, I'm just going to stop. I'm like, yeah, that's okay. So, but I went through the motions,
Did you feel pushed into a corner?
Not like that. Not
well, emotionally pushed into a corner?
I did feel like there was some pressure for me to do something with her.
If you could snap your fingers and not have done that in the moment, would you have done that? Yeah,
I would have done that.
So that's on the spectrum of assault.
It's on the spectrum, yeah. It's just that she certainly wasn't. But yes, sure, it's on the spectrum. There was
she should have stopped and said, "Are you sure you want to do this?"
Yeah, it's just that. But by the way, this is part of the problem: is that what teenager, especially back then, has that language or understanding?
Well, like I said, we manage it usually by subtle nonverbal communication. For example, just in that story, had you ever kissed her before?
I don't know. Maybe.
Oh.
Maybe.
But you weren't boyfriend and girlfriend.
We were not boyfriend and girlfriend, no.
And
we were friends.
You didn't have an agreement that it was okay for her to see you naked in the bathroom.
No.
And, and she probably figured, well, anyway, the point is that it's on the spectrum because she should have at least picked up on the fact that non-verbally.
Right. But I guess one thing I'm getting at is so even let's just assume that if you draw the bell curve, some large percentage of people would pick up on all these cues and all these things. But we know that a lot of them don't. So you would think that we would educate our kids a little bit with more tools.
Yeah.
Right?
How about that?
Right, because in my sex ed class, all I learned was about there's the fallopian tube.
Well, or what people do, which you hear about, is consent forms.
Right, which is the other extreme.
Well, which is idiotic. We have been managing consensual sex in our society for a long time without consent forms. And the way that we do it is through, fairly subtle, but, direct communication around consent, and that's what we need to look at, in terms of Now, if there's a question or you want to just make sure, then by all means, break out the forms, I guess. Anyway, so yeah, they say these lectures, they'll say, we do the man-female thing because of statistics. But the fact is most engineers are men, right? So how about I just say from now on, whenever I refer to engineers, I'm going to refer to them as male.
Right.
So when men build things, ... that doesn't seem right? And statistically, there's probably more of a ratio disparity in engineers than there are among perpetrators. Another thing is most people who are compulsive shoppers are women. Something like 95% of compulsive shoppers are women. So whenever I refer to people suffering from shopping issues, I'm just going to refer to them as female. So when the shopping addict relapses, she often blah, 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 blah. It's like, no, that doesn't feel right? It completely genders the phenomenon and completely unnecessary. We have several words in our language available to us. Right. We can say, when the engineer builds something, they or that person or that individual or to a lesser extent, he or she, when someone's suffering from shopping, disorder relapses, that person, or when a sexual assault takes place, that person perpetrates blah, blah, blah. We have words for it. And I know it causes distress for people because they want to gender everything. And it creates this weird question mark. What gender is the person? It doesn't matter what gender the perpetrator is. You can let it go. Just think of an amorphous, androgynous person who is perpetrating a sexual violent act.
I wonder if it's even worse in Spanish where everything is gendered.
I think it is. Well, you tell me.
I don't know. It's like una persona. Actually, ironically,
person is a female.
Persona is a female. So
yeah, I sometimes feel even worse or more pessimistic about language systems that gender everything.
Yeah.
And how hard it would be to degender things. You know what I mean? But anyway, personally, I think that lectures and all of us are too scared to admit that women are perpetrators of terrible abuse and terrible violence. I think we're actually afraid to admit that. It's because it's incredibly threatening to certain foundational aspects of our society that women are soft and good and motherly, and men are puppy dog tails and everything that smells. Right. Women, especially in liberal culture, women are put upon. They are the victims of misogyny and, patriarchal society and sexism, right? And men are the bad guys.
Right.
And they match sexual assault and domestic violence and intimate partner violence with essentially gender politics. It's fine to talk about them, the two subjects together, but they equate the act of fighting against sexual perpetrators as a pro-female action. Like when you were talking about that person who came forward during the Me Too movement and said, I'm a man and me too.
Right.
And people were like, no. The Me Too movement is a female movement.
Right.
That is wrong. That is destructive. That is fighting people. Why are you fighting them? Why are you fighting fellow victims that are coming forward, Now, if a man is stepping forward and saying, oh, come on, it happens to men too, let it go. Okay, yeah, by all means, punch him in the nuts. But if it's a male coming forward and saying, yeah, I
had a bad experience too.
I've been a victim too, and I can relate.
Right. It's a helpful relate aspect.
Well, and Me Too isn't Me Too women. It's Me Too. Me. There's no gender in that. So if I have been sexually assaulted, then me too.
And I can, for example, I can say me too from both sides of the equation. I say, yeah, I've also been guilty. And yeah, I've also been, affected. Right.
Yeah.
I just had an interesting realization. I don't think I had put this together. The girl I lost my virginity to was very, very sexually aggressive. And when we were first dating, we would be out in public, like at a park, and she would be actively grabbing my crotch and trying to unzip me and all these things. And I was often, like, no, not here. No, like, which is, and then when we were,
Did you consent to the game?
I mean,
or did you not consent?
It's just a hard question to answer.
Did you want to play the game?
I think if I could have waved a magic wand, we wouldn't have been doing that.
Interesting.
But there was certainly some curiosity because it's like, well, she likes me.
Right. So that's on the spectrum.
That's on this,
and that's the price that a lot of people pay. If we're going to stick to women on women, a lot of women victims will pay that price because they feel like they need to in order to please the person that.
Yeah.
That's another thing about sexual assault is like, that's, one of the myths. It's like, well, married couples can't sexually assault each other.
Right.
And you can have sexual assault and terror and sort of unequal deals that are made
right
in the midst of a relationship that the victim actually wants.
Yeah.
You wanted that relationship with her.
Right.
And were willing to pay the price of your own victimization, mild victimization, because you wanted to retain that relationship.
Right. And then what's interesting is I do wonder if that reignited a mental model for me that had been dormant.
Right.
Because, I was saying like, I never really did that again or whatever. And I never had any of those issues in junior high or with my other girlfriends or whatever. Everything that happened was after that and with alcohol involved. Right. So I mean, it's just, right now I'm completely speculation, but it is interesting that, I have those vivid memories. I remember we were at the park and I remember it wasn't just at the park and it wasn't just one time. And I didn't see it as a bad thing. I just saw it as something I didn't want to do, something that made me uncomfortable. But then part of me was like, oh, I'm so glad she's so sexually aggressive. Like this is interesting.
Right. I wonder if someone who, or you, if you hadn't had the history that you did, if you would have, given her more firm boundaries around that, around just like, hey, so I get it, but let's not right now.
Right. Or, because yes, absolutely. Or engaged her in a more direct way in either case, because I think I'm just realizing, I really hadn't really thought about this before. I'm realizing that it is so tricky for people that don't have those clear boundaries or those clear things. You can easily slide into being a victim or slide into being abusive without you even knowing it's happening.
Right. So imagine back then if you had been targeted by a more severe predator,
right,
who groomed you and this sort of thing. How easy it would have been.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I would have been very susceptible to that.
Right. And that would have compounded, the trauma for you. So just some stories that I've heard from people over my lifetime among friends and family about women on women sexual assaults. I have a friend who is a model, and she was at a gig where she was like a living statue. It was actually a lesbian fundraiser of some kind.
Okay.
And drinking and all this kind of stuff. And they had women in, not much clothing acting as statues.
Right.
And she told me that that women would regularly come up to her and sexually assault her.
Yeah.
One groped her, another licked her, and she walked out of there just feeling raped.
Yeah.
By these people. and she just thought like, if I was at the same event and it was like all men, they never would have done that to me,
right?
Because they would know, or not, they necessarily wouldn't, but she suspected that wouldn't happen in a context.
Or most would probably know that that's
right, because
wrong.
Because the men would say like, well, you can't just grope a woman just because she's, you know, a worker.
Right.
But in the female gay world, there's a sort of insular protection of, well, we don't involve the system because we can't trust the system. And women can't assault other women. You know, research shows women hold these views just as much as men do.
Sure, yeah.
So so I speculate that at this, you know, lesbian get together, that there's a cultural notion that, you know, gay people don't assault each other. You know?
Dude, I've been at so many parties where a woman that doesn't know another woman comes up and grabs her breasts and go like, whoa, these are nice. Or like, oh, look at what you're wearing. Oh, you're such a, or they slap their ass. Like they don't know each other. Right. And it's totally tolerated. Like it's totally okay.
Right. Because in our society, we have slowly woken up to the notion that sexual assault happens as from men perpetrating on women.
Yeah.
We have learned there are, like, you know, in the 50s, men would slap a waitress on the butt.
Yeah.
And it was fine. And then we learned over time, oh, well, actually it's harmful and it hurts people's feelings and can make them really scared. And so we can't do that kind of thing. And so that has, at the very least, become stigmatized.
Yeah.
But in the gay world, they've yet to have enough of that in order for it to be commensurate with it in the heterosexual world, you know, and particularly women perpetrating it. Right.
Do you remember, I told you that story about where I was in Vancouver at some random place. It was very late at night and I'm just talking to this one girl and then she licked my face.
Why don't you want to say I was there?
Well, I didn't know if you wanted me to say that. All right. Do you remember when I told you because you were there?
And I filmed it?
Oh, I know. But anyways, the point is that case. Now, in my case, in that
so
instance,
well, you got to tell everyone.
All right,
so it was late at night and
we were in Vancouver
and we were at a pizza place.
Yes.
So in Vancouver, BC, the late night food of choice is either pizza or shawarma.
Yeah.
And we were at a pizza place. And so everyone's kind of coming in from the bars and everyone's having fun. And then you are, you're pretty loud and obnoxious.
Yeah.
And then there's this woman there who's also loud and obnoxious. And the two of
we're
you,
sort of bantering.
The two of you kind of hit it off and you're going back and forth. And then I start filming.
But I didn't think we had hit it off. I mean, I thought she was cute, but I wasn't like explicitly flirting, but we were bantering.
No, it was very quick. Like you started talking for about a minute. I probably have the entire interaction on because I started filming with my iPhone.
Right.
And then you started singing, like you started improvising a song and dance number, the two of you.
Okay.
And then she just grabs you and licks your face.
Licks, like long lick, like from bottom up, like.
Yeah.
And so now, did I like it? I actually did, right? Because I was in the party mood.
And you're into that sort of thing.
And I'm into but I did think even then, not in the moment, but like later, I thought, if the situation were reversed, I think I would get a lot of shit for that. Like I'm sitting there and I just met some girl and I lick her face.
Well, at least the difference is not that you necessarily would have gotten shit.
Sure.
But the question in your mind is there.
Yeah.
You know, you're like, I might hurt someone's feelings and I might embarrass myself.
Right.
Whereas a woman doing it to a man in our society or a woman doing it to a woman, that notion hasn't been made well known enough that the question mark is there, you know, strong enough for people.
And again, I will go back to one thing, and I appreciate what you're saying that there might be subtle cues that some of us are not as attuned to. But I will say that there is a party culture out there and it hopefully is changing. It probably is changing. But the party culture that I sort of grew up around when I was in my 20s it sort of was. I would have if interviewed, I would have never said that sort of behavior isn't exactly what you should be doing.
Well, so in certain contexts, people knowingly enter the context that and know that the chance of groping increases, and they choose that because they're cool with it. You know, I've been in similar contexts too. I don't think you and I have been in the same have you ever and I been in the same context in it? Because the context that I'm thinking about are Burning Man people.
Oh, I see.
I mean, I've been at Burning Man events, and there's literally a sex orgy happening in the other room.
Yeah.
And the door's open. You know what I mean? It's not like you can't see it. You know, it like 30 naked high people.
Right.
So it's a different set of social rules than if I was at, you know, a sports bar, for example.
And I guess that's part of the point is, first of all, it is 3 a.m. in the morning, and we are both dancing. She's not obviously my friend's girlfriend, and she and I look like we are reacting positively to each other. And did she maybe transgress a little bit far? Yeah, but I wasn't reacting negatively. So that's where it gets a little grayer, right? It's a little gray zone there.
And we've talked about this before, and my point that I came to the last time I talked about this was, as a society, we need to have stricter rules around that and be careful.
Right.
You know, the sacrifice, the place we got to the last time we talked about this was, you know, I was saying those contexts, you need to be absolutely positive that the other people know that's the situation. Yeah. Like, I don't know if you want to talk about this, I'll edit this out. But you go to a party every now and then where that's basically explicitly the point.
That's right.
It's an annual event or something. Yeah. And everyone knows.
Sadly, it's no longer going to happen, but whatever.
But everyone knows.
Yeah.
And if you're invited, you're told, by the way, this is essentially a polyamorous event where people, you know, the rules don't apply anymore.
Like not to the extent of like a big orgy breaks out, but it's certainly like there are the lowered boundaries for sure.
Right. Still consensual, but you're going to end up being propositioned, you know, more often than you would be in another context. So, so my point is the sacrifice is that maybe we don't get to have as much fun in an ambiguous situation.
In random, ambiguous situations.
And that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make.
In order to prevent the abusive moments.
Right. Because, you know, it's a small price to pay for...
Because honestly, if she had said, like, do you mind if I lick you? I would have said, not at all.
Right. Yeah, right. All she has to do is just be like, by the way, I'm going to lick your face. You know, is that okay? You know, and if you weren't into it, you'd be like, what? No.
Yeah, no, please don't.
Yeah. Exactly. Or just like, or you'd make a joke like, oh my God, gross, or whatever. You know, like it doesn't take much. Plus, did she have to lick your face?
No.
You know what I mean? Like there were a whole other, you were having fun.
Right.
It would have been a memorable moment anyway. Right. She didn't have to lick your face. Sure. It's so weird. Yeah. Another story is that a female friend of mine was really drunk with her friend, another female friend, and they were drinking and having a good time. And they were friends. They had hung out before and drank before. And I think, and then my friend's friend was like bi-curious or on some level, and took that, and they had kind of been slightly physical with each other in the past, you know, like, I don't know, like hugging warmly, this kind of thing. Nothing sexual at all, and they had probably talked about sex before and this kind of thing. And then as the night progressed, the bi-curious friend started to get very handsy with my friend. And my friend said that she sort of dissociated at times and was like, wait a second, what's happening? But at the same time, she's like, well, this is my friend, so I'm safe, right? But long story short, she ended up being definitely on the spectrum of sexually assaulted.
Wow.
Throughout the evening and
Right.
later on in the night, and had to, and was slept in a terrified closet somewhere,
Oh, geez.
kind of a thing, and so it happens.
I think this is the point of, this is why Me Too happened, because it's all around us.
Yes, it is.
And that's both to say that, I think you mentioned this in a previous episode. I do think that if we had more of an ability as a society to talk about it more openly and less accusingly when it's not really bad yet, especially when we're young and just learning, then I think we could prevent a lot more of the really bad stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Well, are you saying that because it's so politicized now, it's hard to...
No. I mean, it's such a taboo forever to talk about these things that... So as an example, right? Like, so I'm coming up as a little person, and if people as a society are telling both the people that might be trying to abuse me and then telling me when things are right and when things are wrong, and I'm learning that. I'm learning that both in school, I'm learning it from my peers, I'm learning it from family, I'm learning it from people that see the behavior. I'm probably going to stop that behavior way sooner, or learn way sooner.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The analogy I always say is, when you were 5, if someone came up to you and punched you in the nose,
right,
you don't wonder about that.
Yeah.
You go, ow.
And I tell someone.
And you tell someone.
Yes.
But when it comes to rape,
Right.
People don't report it.
Right.
If Harvey Weinstein regularly stabbed people in the neck with a pencil as hard as he could when he was upset, I don't think it would take 30 freaking years.
Well, part of it, obviously can't speak for Harvey, but part of it is that you can, when it comes to sex and maybe other kinds of mental abuse, you can be abusive without the victim initially, at least, or obviously feeling, in all cases, the pain that might go with it, the physical pain. Whereas the punch example, you feel the physical pain. You might even be blood.
Well, right.
bleeding.
Well, because we don't teach people to, like what Eve is talking about.
Yeah.
She was sexually assaulted, raped, and terrified, and she walked away from that situation and did not categorize that as an assault.
Right. And presumably, I don't know all the details, obviously. Presumably, she wasn't physically harmed directly. Like, she might not have had bruises or bleeding or something.
But, when she looks back on the situation, she remembers dissociating. She remembers staring at the ceiling. She remembers not wanting to do it.
But to your point, if same thing, she goes in, the girl locks the door, and she grabs a ruler and smacks her and breaks her nose.
Right. Or just threatens to. Like, like picks up a sword and says, you know what? I have a fetish about stabbing people with swords.
Yeah.
Like, and you're scared.
Right.
Okay. There's no physical harm.
Right.
And then you somehow get away.
Right.
You're going to go like, holy shit, that woman,
tried to stab me.
Yeah. That was like fucked. She locks me in a room and intimates she might stab me with a sword. Like because our society is so Victorianly repressed around sexuality, we send so many messages that have this essential side effect that people don't even recognize, because as soon as sex happens in their life that they're uncomfortable with, they instantly suppress it.
Right.
Because they're like, shame, didn't happen, Whereas we don't have that when someone hits you over the head with a bat. Like, we're like, ow, that's all out in the open. And it's taught. Like, when a child, let me just get real specific here. You're on the playground and you're on the jungle gym and you're at a public playground.
Yeah.
And you're looking at your young daughter, and 4 years old. She's playing on the jungle gym, and another girl walks up to her and, hits her over the head with a rock. You stand up and you're like, what? And the other parent comes over and is like, what happened? You're like, your kid just hit my little girl with a rock over the head, and the other parent's like, whoa, like, oh, okay. It's normal scenario.
Right.
Violence. Okay.
Right.
It happens. Okay. Now let's do another scenario. Same two kids. You're watching your little 4-year-old Angel play on the playground, and a girl walks up and sticks her hand up the girl's skirt.
Right.
What do you do? Do you think you're going to stand up? Whoa! No. Hey, your daughter just stuck her hand up my... No. You're going to be like,
okay. Hey, honey, don't...
Let's not... You're going to give a message to that 4-year-old that like something weird just happened that we can't talk about. And your body, and we don't fight back. We just appease the perpetrator to get them away from us, because I don't want to accuse... Mrs. Johnson over there of raising a rapist. Right. So, okay.
Hey, come over here. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
But the girl just, I know. Just.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what we do. Repeat, rinse, repeat, rinse throughout one's life. And this is what we get, people.
Yeah.
This is what we get. Okay, let's look at some research here. Research shows that alcohol and drugs are often involved in female sexual assaults. So they've actually looked into when females assault. By the way, so the research, there's almost no research regarding women perpetrators. I have access to all the scientific journals in psychology and social psychology and, domestic violence and, anything psychological phenomena I have access to, or I can get access to.
Yeah.
And I did several word searches in the database. It is hard to find anything in it. And most of it is female perpetrators of domestic violence or intimate partner violence on men usually, but sometimes women. So when you look at female perpetrator, it's almost all in the domestic violence world.
Wow.
And there's not a lot of it. Okay. And there's almost nothing on the internet around women on women sexual violence.
Right.
I mean, the internet is filled with billions of useless articles and websites and stuff. And yet,
and lots of girl on girl.
And trying to find woman on woman sexual violent, anything, just even a comment on Reddit, it is really hard to find. I mean, essentially nothing, actually.
That's because it doesn't exist, huh?
Right. And when female perpetrators are discussed, like I said, it's usually DV, and if it is sexual assault, it's a sexual assault of a man. So there's almost nothing on the internet or in the scientific literature regarding female rape on a female.
Which is surprising considering that female prisons are all female.
Right. Well, maybe that's what I need to look at is like prison rape in female prisons. Yeah. Now, as I said earlier, I just want to point out that because it's so hard to research this sort of thing, because essentially what you have to do is you have to wait for it to be reported, and you have to wonder if it's accurate.
Right.
Or you have to have people tell you it happened. And because we're so backward, if they're not going to tell the police, do you think they're going to tell a random, researcher on a survey?
Right.
So it's really hard to know. And because we stigmatize, victims so badly, and we particularly stigmatize victims of women violence and victims of women's sexual violence, it's just hard to know. But as we start to loosen that up a little bit, we're starting to get some data that it seems to suggest that just as many women are sexually violating people as men are, which again, it's hard to know because it's hard to measure this sort of thing. But particularly when you expand the notion to the true definition of sexual trauma to sexual acts that are basically non-consensual, that are traumatizing to the target.
Right.
Like what you went through as a child, that was a sexual assault. Were you penetrated? Were you terrified? Did you have a knife to your throat? All the sort of normal cultural notions of sexual assault weren't met.
And that was unreported.
Right.
Right.
Okay. what percentage of men, according to research, have sexually assaulted? What percentage of men have been sexually assaulted? Do you think?
By anyone?
Yeah, by men or women.
Percentage of men that have been sexually assaulted.
And it's an estimate based on
10%.
About 30%.
Wow.
Of men
A third.
have been sexually assaulted in their lifetime.
Wow.
Percentage perpetrated by females. So of those 30% of men who have, so we're just talking about men, because like I said, there's hardly any research women, but there is some research. What percentage of
By
women?
the way, sorry, if that were global, for example, right?
Yeah.
So it's let's say 2 billion plus men. And if at least,
Well, it wouldn't be, it'd be 1 billion men.
well, if it's, did you say it was 30%?
Right. But there's half of the population is men.
Sure. Okay, fine. But
Yeah, 1 or 2 billion men.
1 or 2 billion. And let's say it's one per, so it means there's at least 500 million, if not 1 billion abusers.
Right. Or say a ratio of 1 to 10.
Sure.
So, 100 million abusers are out there abusing men. Yeah.
All right. But anyways, back to your question.
So what percentage, so of those men who have been sexually assaulted, how many of them said they were, of those incidents were by females? What percentage?
That were reported, right?
Yeah.
Just what we know. Okay.
Or estimates.
Out of the 30%.
I think it's reported. Yeah, I think it's reported.
Well, I'd say 30%.
10%.
10%.
Yeah. So still, according to this study anyway, vast majority of men are saying
Men abuse them.
men abuse them.
Yeah.
But, 10% by women, which again, I broke it down. If we're just looking in the United States, that's about 5 million men in the United States who have been sexually assaulted by a woman.
Right. But the other subtlety there is, there's, as you know, many times in my life where I wouldn't have said I was assaulted.
Right.
And if I hadn't been assaulted at 5, those other things I mentioned, I certainly would have never even began to categorize them as an assault.
Exactly. And Eve, even though it was clearly a classic date rape situation, didn't know until her therapist.
It wasn't even a date, by the way.
Right. But acquaintance
rape. Yeah.
And she happens to go to therapy with a therapist who happens to be woke enough to actually, convince her, look, you were assaulted.
Right.
Another study, Hammock et al. 2017. They gave scenarios. So this is interesting. So they got 251 participants. About 60% were women, to read scenarios involving. So they had the same scenario and they would just switch out the gender. So it would be the exact same details.
Right.
And they would just say, when the man, and the woman victim. And then sometimes it'd be the woman did this to the woman victim. Mm-hmm. They found some very interesting things in terms of so then they asked them afterwards, so how bad was this? Or how upsetting was this? Or how scared do you think the victim was? They found they were much more concerned for female victims than male victims.
I'm sure.
On the exact fucking same circumstances.
Right.
Exact. Well, surely the male's okay. And they were more upset about male perpetrators than female perpetrators.
Right. That makes sense.
Exact circumstances.
Right.
That's how dumb we are. Okay. Male aggressive actions are perceived as being more illegal and more harmful than the same aggressive actions perpetrated by females.
Right.
Again, same scenario. They're on a scale from 1 to 10, how illegal is this? Oh, males, way more illegal. You know, well, women, they can, essentially it's when women do it, it makes it okay. And it can't be harmful because it's a woman doing it. They also, according to research,
remember in American Psycho, he's it's disease free when he's trying to get his friend and the prostitute to make out. He's it's disease free.
Also, research shows that male victims are seen as stronger and basically more resilient than female victims.
Sure.
Under the same circumstances. Also, this isn't. Well, here's the last research study. Sexual victimization is more prevalent for gay women. So, the norm heterosexual women, 35% of them will report having been the victim of a sexual violent crime in their life. Right. But for lesbians, it's 44%.
So that's an amazing statistic. Because yeah, absolutely, I would have. If you had asked me, I would have said before this. I said no, it's probably much lower for lesbians.
Yeah, right. But for lesbians, well, one, it could be assaulted by a man.
But either way, I would have still said like no, because like the man would probably not go after the lesbian.
Right.
I mean, it's just so ignorant, like just in general.
Right. And 61% for bisexual women.
Wow. 61%.
Right. So almost double rates for bisexual women.
Oh my God.
So one of the things that we see in the media are a completely double standard around humor when you have a female beating up the husband.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
It's a total trope, right? Yeah. Like, oh, here comes the wife with the rolling pin.
Absolutely. Not only that, but the unconsensual sex as well. Like how many sitcoms and movies and things where the woman shuts the door and shoves the guy and just proceeds to aggressively go after them, and the guy's like, whoa, and we're like, yeah,
like,
but then you flip it and you're like, whoa, what's happening?
Yeah,
except if it's the 60s, then you're like, fine.
Right. It reminds me of a YouTube video I saw the other day. I think they're at like some kind of Brazilian festival of some kind, and there's this woman entertainer dancing around in her skimpy thing, and there's all these people around, and this guy comes out, and he seems like he's a little drunk, and he comes out and he starts kind of like dancing with her, and people are filming, and I was like, yay, and they're like, oh, look at this, middle-aged guy trying to keep up with the Brazilian dancer, and everyone's having fun, and then all of a sudden out of the crowd, what seemingly is the man's wife comes out of nowhere and just starts hitting him hard.
Oh.
Like in the back of the head. And the man, so the man's dancing.
He's dancing.
Innocently. He's not touching her.
Right.
Okay. So he's just dancing. And that's the thing you do in this context,
oh my
right?
God.
And the woman enjoyed it. The woman's like, yay, a man I can dance with. And this woman comes out of the crowd and just starts beating him over the head. And he's sort of disoriented, and he starts wandering. He starts trying to get away from this woman. And the woman just keeps beating him on the back of the head hard. Okay. So this video, the only reason why I saw it was because it was upvoted on Reddit.
Wow.
You know what I mean? Like, this is the reason why it was on the front page of Reddit, Now,
wow.
Because isn't that hilarious? Isn't it hilarious to see a man being beat by his wife for doing something? I mean, that's right there. That's a real life example of a trope that has happened in countless movies and TV shows.
Right.
And that is destructive.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as James Bond in the 60s pushing down a girl and forcing himself.
Kiss.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, we eradicated that, or we at least stigmatized that. We have a long way to go with heterosexual rape as well. But we are still in the dark ages when it comes to the notion that women can perpetrate this sort of thing. Because to me, if we let's just reverse it.
Right. The woman is dancing.
There's a man, and the woman's dancing, and this guy comes out of the audience and slaps her across the back of the head.
Right.
Her hair goes up. She goes running, and he continues to just slap her on the back of the head.
No one's laughing.
No one is laughing.
Now, obviously, there is this aspect, which is that in general, not obviously everyone, just in general. A male can do more physical damage on average than a woman can, given the same tools.
Kind of. I mean, like this couple.
Yeah.
They were both stocky individuals. Yeah. I'm not quite so sure. You know what I mean?
No, I'm actually not even offering this as this is fact. What I'm trying to say is I think this plays into people's heads. Right. Because like, well, just throw a gun into the equation. Now what?
Right.
Like now everyone's on the...
a knife.
A knife, whatever.
A bat.
Yeah, and of course. So no, the reality is, no. Anyone can harm anyone.
Well, like another example that just occurred to me, and I forget the circumstances. Maybe you remember. Lorraine Bobbitt.
The penis cutting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember the circumstances around that?
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure he had cheated on her and she was pretty upset. But then, so he was asleep.
She cut
the penis and then drove and threw it out the window.
Right. So I remember this. This was like 93 or something. I remember it was a huge story in our society, and most people were on the woman's side.
Or at least there was some sort of joking around the situation.
Right. Let's reverse it.
Yeah.
A woman cheats on her husband. The man cuts off her boobs.
Yeah.
Or cuts her nose off.
Right.
Or her ears. Or,
right.
I don't know, cuts her at all.
Her clitoris, like something horrible.
Cuts off her clitoris.
I mean, like...
Yeah, cuts off her clitoris.
Yeah.
That's a good example. Cuts off her clitoris. Are we laughing about that?
No one is laughing.
Like, is that okay? You know, somehow it's like, oh, when women do it, it's fine. Now, I'm not saying with this argument that I'm going men's rights. What I'm saying is, for Eve's sake, having been as a woman, being victimized by a woman, we have to recognize that women are just as capable of violence and abuse and psychopathic behavior or confused denial, acting out their own abuse behavior as men are.
And that they are just as capable of receiving such abuse from women.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying. And all you got to do is like reverse the genders, and it is not a false analogy.
Right.
It's a real analogy. Right. What I'm doing when we're reversing the genders is we're switching it up so that you can relate.
Yeah.
Because most people have a narrative in their head about being terrorized by a male, you know? And it's like, we're only switching it so that, you know, you can feel the feelings that people feel as they're being raped and assaulted by a woman.
Right.
You know? All right. So in conclusion, thank you, Eve, for prompting us to talk about this. There are so many victims out there. So many victims like you in the past, Eve, who didn't even know that you've been victimized. And even if they do know they were victimized, they don't feel like they can come forward because there's almost nothing on the internet to help validate or be a place for people to talk about it.
Right.
And even if they do come forward, people will tend to play down what happened to them. It's, you know, it's terrible.
Yep.
My recommendations for everybody is let's not refer to perps as male. Let's just say people, just like we don't refer to engineers as male. Let's try to raise awareness. Let's also don't laugh at jokes involving female perpetrators or rape in general, honestly, but particularly female perpetrators. Like, just don't laugh at the jokes and the comics will stop saying, and don't upvote things on Reddit that involve that kind of stuff. Or shame them for upvoting it. If someone tells you a story about a female perp, take it just as seriously as you would if the perp were male.
Yeah.
Also, you clinicians out there, do some research in this area. I'm telling you, if you're looking for a dissertation idea, dissertations that by requirement, you have to do something new.
Right.
Novel. And in some areas, it's really hard to find. One of the biggest tasks you have to do is you have to read and review every single study that has ever been done, potentially in any language,
right,
related to your topic, to make sure that your study has not already been done.
Right.
It is an arduous task, but one of the best things you can do to save yourself the trouble, because it can take years to find out the answer to that question,
right,
is to pick something that is obviously
under-researched.
Yeah. This is one of them. So if you want to save yourself, weeks of lit review, and even just writing the lit review, because there's not much to write on, women sexual violence is a potential thing to do. Also, write about it, blog about it, Reddit about it. And also, if you're having trouble imagining, and really getting it into your bones that a woman can be just as terrifying as a man, seek out stories and get a clear picture from people about accounts about female perpetrators.
Yep.
It might be hard to find, so we need to also tell stories. What's the final word, Berto?
Yeah, I mean, from my experience, of course, I experienced firsthand the fact that, yes, females absolutely can be sexual perpetrators. I also know that in my experience, boundaries can be really hard to know, especially if you've been through these kind of things. And if you are a female in this society, you already probably are not on your guard when it comes to another female because of all the things we've been talking about. And you yourself might not be on the guard of you abusing because you don't think of it that way. So, talking, therapy, reading, introspection, I think we all can use it.
I just remembered another I'll just tell a very short story. Someone was in a woman was in like a spring break vacation kind of situation. And she was drugged and assaulted by women.
Huh? Are you kidding?
There were men also involved, but you could argue the perpetrators were women.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was super criminal and just super traumatic and super,
oh my gosh,
like the classic stories that you hear.
Yeah.
Right. But in your head, roofing and all that kind of stuff,
right.
you think, oh man,
the man roofing.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, women are,
right.
Why not? Right.
Unbelievable.
Well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. If you have a story and you care to share it and you want me to talk about it on the podcast, let me know. Email us at contact@psychologyinseattle.com. And please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.